Every 250 years, powerful leaders, tyrants, and dictators impose their will on the world, conquer large swathes of the planet, and write themselves into the history books. They leave empires in their wake, but over time, the people start to see problems with the regime and demand justice. Later, either wise rulers reform society, or the people rise up and tear everything down, ready for the cycle to begin anew with a fresh vision. If you know a thing or two about astrology, you'll already suspect that I'm talking about the cycle of Pluto, signifier of power, which takes 248 years to orbit the sun. But the idea that the history of empires resonates to a roughly 250-year cycle isn't just an astrological one. The soldier and historian Sir John Glubb claimed in his famous essay, The Fate of Empires, that the average empire lasted 250 years. And this has become a well-known idea in historical circles, even if it isn't widely accepted. But could this pattern of history be about to end? My guest in this episode thinks it might be. The astrologer Rosie has done some great research on Pluto's correlation to history and has identified the moments in its cycle when the great tyrants of history tend to rise up, as well as others when popular revolution comes. And interestingly enough, next year in 2025, we're about to enter one of the periods of revolution. But here's the kicker. This is the last time for thousands of years that this will happen. The relationship between Pluto and the Earth is changing, and a pattern that's held since the dawn of recorded history is about to be broken.
What has brought me hope with understanding Pluto going out of bounds is that Pluto is only going out of bounds one more time between 2025 and 2035, and it portends a time where some very extraordinary and radical developments could happen that are beyond what we can imagine at this time.
In this episode of World Astrology Report, we're going to explore the mind-blowing historical correlations of the Pluto cycle and ask the question, are we about to witness the end of history? If that sounds good to you, then get ready for another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. If you're enjoying this video so far, then please do me a favor and click that little like button down there, and do consider subscribing to this channel and even activating notifications to make sure you don't miss future episodes. And before we dive in, I have a couple of quick announcements. I'm currently taking bookings for natal consultations, but spots are selling out quick. So if you'd like me to look at your chart, then do head to my website, worldastrologyreport.com, and book now. And remember that members of World Astrology Report get 20% off my usual fees. Secondly, on December the 21st, I'll be putting out my forecast for 2025 in my next monthly World Astrology Report members live stream. You don't have to be a member to join the stream, and you can purchase entry on the live streams page of my website. But entry to these streams is free for members, so you might want to consider signing up. As a member, you'll also get access to an extended version of this video, in which we dive deeper into history so we get a better idea of where we are in this Pluto cycle and what might be coming next. Finally, I'm raising membership prices in January, so now is the time to get in at the current rates. Thanks for listening. On with the video. Now, we're going to have to explain some technical astrological concepts for you to understand Rosie's research. And the first of these concepts is declination. Usually, when we're talking about the position of planets in astrology, we're referring to their zodiacal longitude, which means their position in the zodiac as measured by their location in degrees within the 12 zodiac signs. But declination is another measure of a planet's position in the sky.
Declination is how far north or south a planet is in relation to the equatorial plane.
The Earth is tilted at 23.5 degrees, or 23 degrees and 27 minutes to be precise, to the ecliptic, which is the plane of the Earth's orbit around the Sun. What this means is that the declination of the Sun ranges from minus 23 degrees and 27 minutes, which it reaches at the winter solstice, to plus 23 degrees and 27 minutes at the summer solstice. At the two equinoxes, the Sun's declination is 0 degrees. But because the orbital planes of the planets are themselves tilted against the ecliptic plane, their declination can go beyond plus or minus 23.5 degrees. And when they do this, they're said to be out of bounds.
it's like when it's beyond 23.5 degrees, it's outside of the degrees that the Earth and the Sun relate to each other. So we have this natural relationship to the Earth in our perspective that is anything between 0 and 23.5 degrees north or south. And that's our connection to the solar system, as if that is our inbounds, as if that's our connection. And then when it goes outside of that, they go outside of what our relationship, our Earth's relationship to the sun is. The definition or the description of planets moving out of bounds is often that they exhibit their most out of control, wild, unleashed behavior. So if it's Venus, it's going to be people falling in love. If it's Mars, it's going to be more volatility, war, explosions. If it's Mercury, it can be the genius insights. It could be the moments where you just have that kind of blinding insight or awareness.
But we're focusing in this episode on Pluto. What does it mean when the planet of power goes out of bounds? The dwarf planet Pluto, named for the lord of the underworld, has to do with the theme of empowerment and with processes of death and rebirth. But what ties these themes together? Well, we can understand that by thinking about the Greek myth of Persephone. Persephone was the daughter of Zeus and Demeter. She was abducted by Hades, the Greek version of Pluto, and taken to the underworld.
On the way up, she eats the pomegranate seeds, and in that process, she becomes kind of a co-queen, co-ruler of the underworld. And so her empowerment is in this process of transformation that she goes through from kind of a naive child, mother's child, to an empowered, equal ruler of the underworld. And so I think that there's a process of transformation that we go through that requires a death, that requires a loss, that requires us to kind of come to our knees in order to be empowered, in order to kind of rise up into a place of coming into authority, rulership of our lives.
The theme of power and Pluto go hand in hand. Pluto was discovered in 1930. At a time when scientists were unlocking the power of the atom and when fascism was taking over Europe. Pluto takes 248 years to orbit the Sun, and it goes out of bounds twice during its cycle, once to the north of the ecliptic and once to the south.
When it's to the north out of bounds, it's in the Cancer-Leo section of the tropical zodiac. When it's to the south, it's in the Capricorn-Aquarius section of the tropical zodiac. So it's often times of very particular and profound transformation when Pluto's out of bounds. It gets to be unleashed.
But Rosie has seen different themes that apply to the north and south out of bounds transits.
So there's a difference between the out of bounds to the north, where we see tyrants, dictators, conquerors, and we can almost track their progression as Pluto goes out of bounds, as it peaks out of bounds, as it leaves out of bounds. And to the south, we can track revolutions. We can see that there are upheavals that happen, collapse of countries, empires. What happens to the north is more the expansion of empires. What happens to the south is either the focus on infrastructure, the rebuilding of an empire from inside, or a collapse.
If you examine the periods when Pluto was out of bounds to the north, you'll be amazed at the list of conquerors and tyrants who appeared in the pages of history. Leaders who appeared during Pluto out of bounds north periods include Adolf Hitler, the Sun King Louis XIV, Mehmet II, who conquered Constantinople, the Mongol Emperor Genghis Khan, and going back further, Odoacer, who sacked Rome in 476 AD, and Augustus Caesar, founder of the Roman Empire. The last time Pluto was out of bounds to the north was between 1938 to 1953. This was the time of the Second World War.
And then it peaked when Pluto was at its most peak of out of bounds, which was 1944, 1945. So those years were kind of the peak years of destruction. It was almost very close to correlating with the atomic bombs unleashed, and we have plenty of empire building that was happening at that time period and massive destruction. And then I think also there was a lot happening in the world stage, the World Bank, the IMF, the early stages of the World Trade Organization, the UN, and maybe more destructively that was also happening was the carving up of the world, that these empires that had just the US, Soviet Union, that were making these decisions for the rest of the world in terms of dividing up Vietnam, Korea. This was the birth of Israel. This was the dividing line between Pakistan and India. The world was kind of fully discovered, so it wasn't the expansion empire conquering that we saw with Augustus, but it was this very controlling where the superpowers were going to kind of take over and determine the fate of so much of the rest of the world.
But we're about to enter a period when Pluto will go out of bounds south, and these periods have a very different flavour. When Pluto goes out of bounds to the south, extant power structures are overturned. Sometimes the people revolt, empires collapse, and societies descend into chaos before reforming in new ways. At others, rulers focus inward, working to empower citizens or at least improve their lot.
Instead of the empire expanding, like when Pluto goes out of bounds to the north, it's when people rise up. There's resistance, there's movements that start. People are claiming or desiring or activating more power. So instead of the dictator having more power, the people start crying out for more power. It's not always successful. Sometimes it leads to the collapse of cultures or countries or empires. Sometimes it leads to new empires that are building. There are quite a few examples of rulers that step in after there's been a lot of chaos, and then they see the writing on the wall, and instead of moving into empire expansion, they focus on infrastructure.
The last time Pluto went out of bounds to the south was between 1775 and 1796. This was a highly revolutionary period in history, as we've seen on this channel many times before.
With the peak at 1783-84, it's the American Revolutionary War, or the American War of Independence, and the French Revolution. And there were revolutions going on. There was uprisings that were happening in Russia at the time, and then Catherine the Great. She did some expansion, but she also really focused on creating education and support and infrastructure for the people in Russia.
The interesting thing to note is that the times when Pluto is out of bounds to the south and when it's in Aquarius closely coincide. I've talked about how Pluto in Aquarius has signified revolutionary periods in history many times before, but perhaps there's nothing special about the sign of Aquarius. It's just that when Pluto is in this sign, it's also out of bounds. If we head back another Pluto cycle, we find that Pluto was out of bounds to the south from 1524 to 1553. This was the height of the Protestant Reformation. It started with Martin Luther's protest in 1517, but was really getting going and having its effects on European society by the time Pluto went out of bounds.
I think about how extraordinary that must have been, because the Catholic Church really was the main power for centuries. Everything needed the blessings of the church, whether people wanted to get married, particularly rulers wanted to get married, go to war, all of that required the Catholic Church blessing. So I think even in concept to think about how extraordinary that was. I think it's the time when Pluto goes out of bounds to the south, it's when people realize that there is a corrupt power in charge and there is an uprising.
If we head back another Pluto cycle, we reach the time when the Crusades finally ended. The knights dispersed throughout Europe, and one of the few direct democracies in the world, Switzerland, was established.
In 1291, it was the final kind of loss. It was the last straw. They were all going home. And the Knights Templar and the other knights and these crusaders kind of splintered into different countries. And there is a theory that there was a group of the knights that went into Switzerland and formed a coalition inside the Holy Roman Empire that began the seed for Switzerland. And Switzerland celebrates the birth of Switzerland in 1291.
Pluto was also out of bounds south from 533 to 580 AD, time coinciding with the rule of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, who made important reforms to the judicial system that gave us the principle of innocent until proven guilty, which we've retained to this day. Heading back another cycle, Pluto was out of bounds south from 285 to 337 AD. This was a time of chaos and persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire under the reign of the Emperor Diocletian, who was succeeded by Constantine as Pluto reached peak declination. Constantine was the emperor who established Christianity as an official religion of the Roman Empire.
There was massive uprisings of the Christians and then the slaughtering of the Christians. But once Constantine got in and Pluto was at its most out of bounds, Constantine was like, okay, we got to stop this. We got to change this. And then he brought in Christianity and found a way for, in a way, freedom of religion at the time.
And right now, we find ourselves heading into another period of Pluto out of bounds to the south. But there's something special about this time. It's the last time that Pluto will do this for thousands of years. Pluto will head out of bounds to the south for a part of every year between 2025 and 2035, and it will reach its maximum extreme declination in October of 2030. So get ready to live through a revolutionary period, one in which many of the extant power structures of the world will be deconstructed. We can look to what we know about Pluto's previous transits through Aquarius, which coincide with these outer bound south periods, for clues as to what will happen. But there's something even more special about this period. Because of the relations between the Earth's tilt, its orbit, and the orbit of Pluto, Pluto won't go out of bounds again for thousands and thousands of years. Each cycle, Pluto has spent less and less time out of bounds, and we've now reached the last of these out of bounds periods, as you can see in this chart. What this means is that a critical pattern of history that has held for thousands of years is about to end.
So this period of time that's coming up is the last time of Pluto out of bounds. And if we look at all these Pluto out of bounds times, whether it's north or south, they tend to be pretty violent time periods or reactionary time periods. I'm hoping this time period isn't as violent, particularly because of the visionary seeds of peaceful protests that started at the beginning of the cycle. When Pluto goes out of bounds, it also doesn't go out of bounds for the entire year. So it's mostly out of bounds just for the second part of the year. The first time it goes out of bounds is September of 2025, and then it's just out of bounds for a couple of months. So we have a different process in these next 10 years that is quite unpredictable, really. I think the Arab Spring and the Me Too movement, the Occupy movements, these were precursors to the movements that we're about to see take off. So what happens once Pluto goes out of bounds is that everybody gets involved. Everybody sees, oh, we can all read the Bible. We can all participate in this revolution in the colonies.
Perhaps this is the last we'll see of figures like Caesar Augustus, Genghis Khan, and Adolf Hitler. But we won't witness revolutions like the Reformation and the Enlightenment revolutions of the late 18th century either, except for this one last time.
If we look at this cycle, it's so different than all the rest of the cycles in that starting in the 1860s, we became a world society. And this idea of separate countries, it still exists. Obviously, we still believe and buy into it, but it's far less accurate than what's actually happening in that we are all interconnected. We can communicate with each other within seconds around the world. Nothing like this could have happened in the prior cycle. And all the things that have happened in this cycle that are radically transformative, including climate change, which was first detected or brought to the attention of scientists at the beginning of the 1860s with Eunice Foote and John Tyndall. We are hitting this precipice, and I think a lot of people feel it. How do we all continue to live on this planet with the divisiveness, with the power structures that are happening? Everything feels like it could crumble pretty quickly. Our entire economy is now based on zeros and ones, and it's moving more and more in that direction with cryptocurrency.
We might as well ask, are we about to witness the end of history as we previously knew it? And what kinds of events in the world could cause such a thing to happen? Rosie has come up with 5 scenarios. So
one is collapse, societal collapse, which happened in 1177 BCE, where it was complete societal collapse. It was like world empires, and they all fell apart around the same time. Then there's revolution that we saw the last time, where there's actual uprising and people fighting each other, and they're neighbors. There's benefic rulers that step in, particularly once there's nonviolent demonstrations. So there's the nonviolent demonstration into having better leaders. I think that's the one that most people are able to envision. But I think there's also a massive scientific paradigm shift that could happen. And we could take Maxwell's equations and rewrite them or rework them. I think our infrastructure is based on electricity, which it could be based on magnetism. I think when people are thinking scientifically at this point in time, I think it's still too small for what the potential is over the next 10 years. And the last is something we've never seen before. It's the last time Pluto goes out of bounds, which is a massive consciousness awakening that is global. I mean, why not? Why can't we all just wake up and come into greater compassion, create different relationships with each other? There could be something really amazing that happens that infiltrates our systems, and the power structures that seem so oppressive at this time could fall apart, crumble, disintegrate. It must have been hard for people to imagine the Reformation, or imagine the end of the Crusades, or imagine the time of Kublai Khan versus Genghis Khan. I think there is some precedence for having things happen that are unimaginable.
It's fun to speculate a little here. Gordon White, who has appeared on this channel in this episode, has said that we're about to live through an archonic apocalypse. The archons are the beings who, in Gnostic thinking, rule the world and maintain it as a kind of prison. An apocalypse is not necessarily the end of the world, but a great revealing. Are we about to witness a great revelation of the nature of the forces that have kept humanity in this endlessly repeating cycle of history and the changing hands of power? Given that Pluto is the planet of power, could we be looking at the emergence of technology that provides free energy? It's our reliance on limited energy sources controlled by a greedy few that keeps us all toiling away and in a state of effective servitude. If we had access to unlimited energy, the entire system would crumble. Perhaps it would somehow set us free. I also can't help but suspect that the UFO phenomenon might have something to do with all this. Could we see an intervention that dissolves the power structures that currently rule the world? And we're also seeing the emergence of AI, which some people think could completely change life on this planet. Indeed, it seems like we're seeing a convergence of phenomena right now that imply history might never be the same again. Now, Rosie has done a tremendous amount of research on the Pluto cycle and its out of bounds periods in history. You can find a summary of it in an article on astro.com, which I've linked below.
I have a book coming out. It's called Persephone's Revolution, Pluto's Path to the End of Empire. And it covers a lot of history. It covers all of these cycles in more depth. And then it covers also what I think is about to happen and unfold in 5 different ways. You can get it at revelor.press. You can get it through my website, rosiefinn.com, and it will be available on Amazon as well.
We've actually simplified Rosie's research a bit in this video. She's actually identified 4 distinct phases of the Pluto cycle. And in the extended version of this video, available for World Astrology Report members, we're going to break down those 4 phases, including the 2 we haven't mentioned yet, so that you can see the bigger picture and where we really are in history. If you'd like to watch that extended video, then please do consider signing up as a member at worldastrologyreport.com. That will also give you free access to my 2025 forecast live stream happening on December the 21st of this month. Details are on my website and I hope to see you there. Now, as we've seen, the times when Pluto goes out of bounds to the south are coincidental with Pluto being in the sign of Aquarius. So understanding one of these phenomena helps to understand the other. With that in mind, I recommend you watch this video in which we try to get a better understanding of what Pluto in Aquarius will be about by thinking about its relation to the other sign ruled traditionally by Saturn, Capricorn. Thanks, and see you next time.